Good afternoon, folks, and thanks for joining. I see a lot of you are connecting to audio or logging on right now. So we will not be starting exactly right now at 1 p.m. I think we'll wait a minute or two just to accommodate those of us who are still logging on. But thank you to those of you who are here so far. We're looking forward to presenting and hearing from you. I see some of us still trickling in, so we'll just give everyone one more minute. And thanks again to those of you who are here so far. All right. Welcome everyone to today's listening session on lead service line inventory contracting services. My name is Britta Romans, and I'm joining you today from the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation. I will be facilitating today's public listening session. In a little bit, you'll be hearing from staff with the Division of Financial Assistance, but before we dive in, I'll quickly go over some meeting logistics. Next slide, please. All right, this listening session is being recorded today. In terms of general participation guidance, I kindly request that everyone remains muted unless you are speaking. Since this is a listening session, we do look forward to hearing your questions and comments after the different segments of the presentation. Once we get to each segment, please use the virtual raised hand function for questions and comments or put them in the chat so we can ensure that we are calling on whoever raised their hand first. If you have any technical issues, feel free to message our staff titled Tech Support on Zoom, and they will be able to help you troubleshoot. While navigating this virtual space, we encourage you to turn your video on if possible. That way we can engage more fully with one another. Finally, please be sure to update your Zoom title with your name and organizational affiliation if applicable, and remind us who you are when you speak. Next, we will do some introductions so you can familiarize yourself with those of us who will be presenting and on the line to answer questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Bin, and I'm a supervising engineer overseeing the bond section of the Division of Financial Assistance. Today's listening session is to discuss options to assist community water systems with lead service line inventories. Our discussion panel includes Christopher Stevens, Assistant Deputy Director of the Division of Financial Assistance, or DFA, Kurt Souza, Assistant Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water, and Jean Fung, our legal counsel advising DFA on the lead service line replacement funding program. Next, please.
Hey, Kim, I'm going to interrupt you there real quick. I just learned that I was on mute for that entire introduction. And I want to make sure that everyone can engage with us meaningfully and can hear all that info. So sorry to interrupt, and sorry, everyone, that I was muted for that. But I just wanted to welcome everyone to today's listening session on lead service line inventory contracting services. My name is Britta Romans, and I am joining you today from the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation. I will be facilitating today's public listening session. In a little bit again, you will be hearing from staff with the Division of Financial Assistance. But before we dive in, I will go over some meeting logistics. So sorry, we're going to have to go back a slide.
All right, and I was, is it my turn?
Yes, okay.
That's okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Din, and I am a supervising engineer overseeing the bond section in the Division of Financial Assistance. Today's listening session is to discuss options to assist community water systems with their lead service line inventories. Our discussion panel includes Christopher Stevens, Assistant Deputy Director of the Division of Financial Assistance, or DFA, Kurt Souza, Assistant Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water, and Jean Fung, our legal counsel advising DFA on the lead service line replacement funding program. Next, please. These are the topics that we are going to go through this afternoon. I will briefly go over the purpose of today's session, the definitions and acronyms that will be used throughout the presentation, the lead service line funding, California Health and Safety Code, the federal lead and copper rule revisions requirements. Then I'm going to present different contracting options and potential scopes to be included in the contract. There will be opportunities for you to provide feedback after the contracting options and again after the potential scope work. Next, please. The purpose of this listening session is to review options available for assisting eligible water systems that need help with completing their inventories, giving stakeholders an opportunity to provide feedback on whether the presented options are viable, and to develop a clear understanding of the scope of work needed to complete the inventories. Next, please. So what is lead service line? For the purpose of the appropriated funds, lead service line is defined as a service line made of lead, which connects the water main to the building inlet. Galvanized service line is also considered a lead service line if it ever was or is currently downstream of any lead service line or service line of unknown materials. Disadvantaged communities, or DAC, means the entire service area of a community water system or a community therein, in which the median household income, or MHI, is less than 80% of the statewide MHI level. Next, please. These are the acronyms that will be used throughout the presentation. I'm not going to read the whole list, but that is for your to see. Next. On November 15, 2021, President Biden signed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill for short. The bill contains a historic $15 billion nationwide and dedicated funding through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund for lead service line identification and replacement for the federal fiscal years 2022 through 2026. This funding is provided to states with no match requirement. Approximately $250 million was allotted to California for the federal fiscal year 2022. Future year allotment is unknown at this time. Next, please. The State Water Board applied for the federal fiscal year 2022 service line replacement grant, along with the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund capitalization grant. As part of the grant application to US EPA, the State Water Board must develop the intended use plan, or the IUP, which is like a business plan to inform US EPA and the public on how the State Water Board plans to utilize the grant funds. On October 3rd, 2022, the State Water Board adopted the base Drinking Water State Revolving Fund IUP and the lead service line replacement supplemental IUP. The supplemental IUP outlines the funding eligibility, eligible entities, and project eligibility. Projects funded under the lead service line replacement funding program must comply with the base Drinking Water State Revolving Fund eligibility requirements, including the federal cross-cutting. Projects must replace the entire service line, not just a portion. Unless a portion has already been replaced or is concurrently being replaced with another funding source. The bill requires that an exact 49% of the funds be provided as non-repayable loan to eligible water systems serving disadvantaged communities. The supplemental IUP authorizes the Deputy Director of DFA to execute grant agreements for 100% principal forgiveness to disadvantaged communities if the demand for 100% repayable loan funding appears sufficient to result in the 49% principal forgiveness ratio. Projects that benefit non-disadvantaged communities are eligible for 0% interest loans with the possibility of principal forgiveness for work done in a disadvantaged community within the service area. Again, this depends on the demand for funding. Next, please. This picture shows a typical scenario of a service line placement and ownership. As mentioned in the previous slide, projects must replace the entire service line, not just a portion, unless the portion has been replaced or concurrently replaced with another funding source. For example, to be considered for the lead service line replacement funding, the water system must replace its customer's service line while replacing system-owned service line. Next, please. Now let's talk about the California lead service line inventories requirements. The Health and Safety Code 116885 requires all community water systems to complete lead service line inventory by July 1st, 2018. This requirement is only applicable on the system-owned lead service lines. Most, if not all, of the community water systems already submitted their lead service lines inventory to the Division of Drinking Water. However, there are still a significant number of service lines reported unknown. Next slide, please. The federal lead and copper rule revisions requires all community water systems and non-transit non-community water systems to complete the initial lead service line inventory by October 16, 2024. The major difference between the lead and copper rule revisions and the California Health and Safety Code is that the lead and copper rule revisions require inventory on the customer-owned lead service line as well. Next, please. Now, let's get into the core of today's presentation. To assist community water systems comply with the federal lead and copper rule revision and to meet funding requirements, DFA staff evaluated options for using set-aside funds from the lead service line replacement grant to contract with third parties to complete community water system inventories of service lines owned by both water systems and their customers. DFA staff coordinated with the Division of Drinking Water staff to explore different contracting options and identify scope support necessary to ensure that all community water systems that need additional assistance can complete the inventories and have necessary information to plan and replace lead service lines. We identified 4 different contracting options along with the pros and cons and an estimated time to execute a contract for your feedback. The first option is invitation for bid. This is the standard contracting service, so there are no surprises here. DFA staff must prepare a solicitation package, including scope of work, cost, bid sheet, minimum qualifications, any applicable late justification, and identify qualified consultants. DFA staff will then submit the solicitation package to the Division of Administrative Services, or DAS, to process and approve. Once DAS approves the solicitation package, DAS will send it to the Department of General Services, or DGS, for final approval and prior to inviting qualified consultants to bid on the contract. The estimated time for the invitation for bid is approximately 10 months. This includes the time that DAS needs to bring this contract to the State Audit Board for approval, because DAS can only execute a contract of $750,000 or less. DFA anticipates millions of dollars for this inventory work. Another con to this option is that DFA has limited influence on prioritization and timeline to process the contract through DAS and DGS. Next, please. This next option is similar to the first one, with the exception that the contract is exempt from competitive bids. Thus, the estimated time to execute the contract is a little shorter than invitation for bid. DGS has a short list of eligible UCs and CSUs that could potentially conduct the lead service line inventory work. Though the time to execute the contract is shorter, UCs and CSUs might use students to complete the work, which will slow down the project schedule and potentially not have the work completed by October 16, 2024. Next, please. Because the lead service line replacement grant is through the U.S. EPA, the State Water Board could tap into their in-kind service that is readily available. This option seems like the easiest and shortest time to start the inventory work, since U.S. EPA has already has a process in place and is currently providing the same service to other states. With this option, DFA staff can send a short email requesting EPA to use a portion of California's lead service line replacement allotment for this service. No solicitation package to be prepared, no trip to the State Audit Board for approval to spend the funds. The only negative thing to this option is that U.S. EPA's pre-selected consultants are out of state. However, those consultants can subcontract to local contractors. The estimated time to start inventory work is 4 to 6 months, most likely within 4 months. Next, please. This fourth contracting option is similar to the last one through U.S. EPA's in-kind service. U.S. EPA has a grant agreement with CSU Sacramento through the Environmental Finance Funding Center funding. DFA staff can start requesting U.S. EPA to use a portion of California's lead service line replacement allotment for this service. U.S. EPA will then amend the grant agreement with the CSU Sacramento to add more funds and scope. CSU Sacramento can then subcontract to complete the inventory work. This option is slightly longer than the last option, mainly to add an additional month for CSU Sacramento to prepare the solicitation package. The main con for this option is that ESC with the CSU Sacramento cannot carry out the large dollar amount project because the program does not have the administrative capacity to subcontract and manage consultants work at this time. Next slide. This slide provides a summary of contracting options and estimated time to execute a contract. I'm going to pause here for a second before we move to the next slide for a set of questions for you to consider. Next, please. These questions are for you to the questions for you to consider for contracting options are: should the State Water Board take advantage of the contracting services with the shortest time to start inventory work? Should the contracting be done statewide, regionally, by system size, or another factor? Are there other options we should consider? I'm going to hand this back to Britta to open for your feedback.
Thank you, Kim. So we will open it up in just a moment, and we look forward to hearing from you, your questions, comments, and thoughts related to contracting options. Please consider and respond to the questions on the screen, as well as the third one on the screen is, are there other options we should consider? So the ones on the screen and other. Um, as I mentioned in the beginning, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on folks in the order of raised hands. And alternatively, if you wouldn't like to share your comment verbally, you can feel free to put it in the chat and I will read it out loud. Okay, so we can open it up. Does anyone have comments or clarifying questions related to contracting services? If so, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. Okay, so as a reminder, we're really looking for your feedback relating to which option we should pursue relating to contracting services. So, Kim went over the different options and some of the pros, some of the cons, and some other considerations that we thought of. If you don't have any thoughts relating to this, that's okay. We can go ahead and move on. But we also want to encourage you to send those in via email. If you end this meeting and things are ruminating and you come up with some feedback later, please feel free to send that our way. Oh, and I am getting a clarifying question, so I'll read it out loud and then I'll pass it to Kim to answer it. So this person asked to confirm these funds would be used for service line replacement only.
The fund, service line replacement is for both inventory and
I think
Thanks.
maybe another, sorry, Britta.
All
So I
good.
think maybe another aspect of that question might be, can it be used for something other than lead service lines? It has to be related to lead service lines. Kim is correct. It can be for the inventory as well as the planning, all the work associated with replacing the lead service line. But it can't be used for something that is unrelated to lead service lines.
Yeah, thank you, Kim and Christopher, for that clarification. If there are any other clarifying questions, we welcome those as well, as long as they're related to contracting options and, just general clarifications relating to lead service line replacement funding. If there are no more, oh, I am seeing a raised hand. I can pass it to you, Pure Source Water. You are muted. I asked you to unmute. There you go.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I'm Martin Mills. I'm the owner of Pure Source Water. We serve 77 amazing homes in Aptos, Santa Cruz County. So a very small water system. And this whole discussion is probably a little bit irrelevant for us. We don't believe we have any lead service lines, but we also have, being a small system, pretty intimate knowledge of our system already. But we have spent quite a bit of time already on our own and need to spend some more time doing our lead service line inventory before that October 2024 deadline. Could it be that funds could be spent to just reimburse systems for their own lead service line inventory process, whatever that might be, hiring their own contractors, doing the work by paying their own staff, overtime, bringing in additional staff, that sort of thing? Is it possible that those funds could be used that way, so they might get out more quickly and be best used by those who have the intimate knowledge of their own system?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Christopher, I see you've unmuted. You want to try and answer that?
Sure. So the short answer to your question, which is, I'm going to rephrase it slightly, but correct me if I'm misstating it. I mean, can you submit an application directly for funding from the lead service line money that we have. So the short answer to that question is yes. Now I say the short answer to that question because there's some complications with these funds. Kim has touched on them, and so I want to put a little bit more, shine a little bit more light on that. One of the things that, one of the requirements that Congress and EPA gave is that 49% of it go to disadvantaged communities. It's exactly 49%. It's not up to 49%. It's not a minimum of 49%. It's exactly 49%. So one of the big hurdles here is finding, and then a portion of it, 25% of it has to go out as loans in order to come up with that percentage. There's also money that's set aside for various purposes, one of them being potentially these inventory contracting options that we're talking about today. So you are free to submit an application for lead service line funding to do your inventories, to do your replacement, whatever the case might be. But we're going to have to find folks that are willing, first and foremost, to take a loan. We have no doubt that we're going to find enough disadvantaged communities that will be able to take that 49% of loan forgiveness. It's essentially a grant, but we need a certain amount of folks to take a loan to balance out that loan forgiveness portion of the lead service line funding. So that's really the biggest hurdle at this point. So if you were to submit an application today, I really can't give you any accurate timeline of when we might be able to execute an agreement with you. Does that make sense? Not necessarily a happy message. I'm not expecting you to be smiling about it, but is that make some sense how that's going to work?
Probably overall just too complicated for a system of our size, I think is the reality.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to make your own decision. Of course, I won't try to make that for you. But yeah, with a small system like that, and the fact that you, from the sounds of it, you don't have any lead service lines, that would be the biggest cost, and that would probably be the thing that would make it worth your while, probably.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and take a question that came in on the chat next. This question says, which of the following contracting options will allow for the most detailed inventory? Example, galvanized lines, galvanized downstream from lead goosenecks, etc.
Well, the different contracting options aren't gonna that's not gonna affect that. They'll all provide the same amount of detail.
Mm-hmm.
Each of them, we would have to develop a scope of work. And so they're all the same in that regard.
Okay, and then another question that came in is a clarifying question asking if the State Water Board or the public water system chooses the contracting option.
So what we're talking about today here is the State Water Board would be choosing the option. So the intent here is to come up with a way to provide inventories and to do them on a wholesale basis for water systems. Now, let me expand a little bit on what I was talking about with the gentleman earlier. A water system is free to go and do its own inventory or to hire its own consultant to do an inventory for its system. We're not, that's not really in question here. What this would be is there's a lot of water systems that, this is going to be a one-time deal to do an inventory and to replace these lead service lines. Certainly many water systems have the resources or the financial resources to be able to do it on their own, but there's probably a lot of water systems that, it's not going to make a lot of sense for each individual water system to do it on their own and to go through the learning curve. So this would be an opportunity to come up with a way that water systems could basically sign up for the service and have someone come in on this wholesale basis and do a bunch of water systems, again, either on a statewide basis or regional basis, Maybe it's by certain system sizes. I mean, that's what we're trying to come up with as part of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Christopher. So moving into another question in the chat, someone has asked, what was the percentage that is required to be in the form of loans?
Yeah, so let me break down. Kim mentioned the $250 million in grant that we received for federal fiscal year 2022. So the way that breaks down percentage-wise is we can use up to 26% for set-asides. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but that's set aside for providing technical assistance, for the administrative costs of running the drinking water SRF, for providing support to Division of Drinking Water for their administration of the drinking water program. So minus 26%, that leaves 74% for actual project costs. So the way that breaks down is 49%, and again, that's an exact figure, exactly 49% goes out as principal forgiveness. You can call it loan forgiveness. In essence, it's a grant. You know, it is technically a loan, but you don't have to pay it back. So for all intents and purposes, for practical purposes, I know the lawyers will kick me under the table here, but for practical purposes, it's a grant, doesn't have to be paid back. And that leaves 25% for loan. So you got 49% as grant and 25% as loan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So another question in the chat is just another clarifying question. This person is asking that the options we're discussing today are going to be funded by, and then set aside, and will be used to conduct inventories for, they're asking how many water systems will be funded to do the inventories.
I think I'll let Kim answer that. I think she's got some numbers here in another slide.
I do have a number of water systems, and I guess that, you know, it's, Owen, can you advance the next few slides? I think the third one after this, that one. So these are the cutoff, the number of water systems, community water systems in California, active community water systems, and breaking down by different sizes. So this is going to be part of the questions that we're going to ask for your feedback as well, on the number of community water systems that we should target or focus on for this particular country.
Okay, so we'll hop back to this one and discuss it further. Perfect. And then, great, someone else's question was answered in the discussion. So I do want to see if there's maybe, you know, one more question or two more questions relating to contracting options. And if not, we can go ahead and move into the next category where we'll present again and then open it up for more questions. I know that the last question was sort of segueing into what we're discussing next, but I want to see if there's any last questions or comments. And if not, we can go ahead and move on. Okay. So I am seeing another question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read it out loud. This person says, if water companies have more than one service district, are you anticipating each district to apply separately? For example, we have 20 water systems all over the state of California in various sizes. Anything but a statewide program could mean that we have to submit several requests for funding. So once again, you know, they're saying that this impacts them if they were required to apply separately for each district, and just sort of, you know, drawing attention to the fact that they might not be the only one in this position. So clarification on if we are anticipating each district to apply separately, or if that's something that we're open to receiving feedback on.
So I'm going to answer the question twice. Mm-hmm. And so the first answer I'm going to give is related to doing the inventories and this contracting on a wholesale basis that we're talking about today. So the idea would be that we would establish whatever contracting option we decide is best. We're intending to come up with a program where people can sign up for the program and get the assistance that they need to complete the inventory of their water systems. So I would imagine that that would be, if they have a number of different water systems, that they would be signing up, you know, to do all those different water systems with this support. So the second answer that I'm going to give is a more general answer to the question, which I'm sort of reading between the lines here, that they're talking about applying for funding from the lead service line replacement program. And so there it gets a little bit more complicated in that we can only execute a funding agreement with a water system. That's what's eligible. Not necessarily the owner of the water system is not eligible for the funding, but the water systems. Now, having said that, there's probably a lot of different parts of the application that we can, you know, I certainly don't want to create extra paperwork for anybody, and that just creates extra paperwork for us as well. So I certainly have an interest in trying to find a more efficient way to submit a quote unquote application. So if there are common pieces of paper that cover all of the water systems, you know, we can work with you to try to figure out a way to do that more efficiently, so that you're not, you know, printing out 20 different pieces of paper with different names and dates on them. And, you know, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The application is there as a tool for us to collect information. So if we can collect it more efficiently from you, I'm certainly in favor of that. But that's something we'd need to talk about in more detail. I can't really do that on the fly here. Hopefully that answers your question in total.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to see if there's one last call for any more questions relating to contracting options. Feel free to raise your hand or throw it in the chat. All right, seeing none, thank you for providing your feedback and thoughts relating to contracting options. This is important as it is sort of the first step and impacts timelines and how we will move forward, whether regionally, statewide, or by system size. And to continue this discussion, I will now pass the mic to Kim, who will discuss potential scopes of work.
Thank you, Britta. Next slide. So DFA staff reached out to US EPA for guidance and had conversations with some of the eastern states on their approach on meeting the lead service line inventory deadline. The next couple slides will show the potential scope of work that DFA can include in the contract. First off, historical record search. This work includes but is not limited to search on property records, local municipal codes and permits, and review water systems records such as distribution system map, drawings, maintenance and replacements records, or inspection records. If there is not enough data, then the service line investigation might be needed to identify the type of service lines. The investigation can be done through visual inspection at the meter box and or house connection. Customer can also conduct scratch tests or magnet tests for self-verification or any other methods approved by the Division of Drinking Water. One thing to note, though, the initial inventory requirements from the lead and copper rule revisions did not mean that all service lines are identified. So expect some unknown materials come October 16, 2024. Next, please. The following scopes are added on to assist community water systems with outreach materials such as preparing of public notifications or access agreement templates, create video tutorial for self-identifying of lead service line, develop the lead service line replacement plan that meets the Division of Drinking Water's requirements, and or develop guidance materials for after the lead service lines were replaced. Next, please. So this table shows, like I mentioned before, the number of active community water systems in California that are breaking down by size to assist us decide on the size of community water systems this contracting service for inventories should be focused on. Some states do inventory on all of the systems, including non-transient, non-community water systems, and some use a cutoff of 1,000 service connections. However, none of the states that we conversed with has the same size of community water systems as California. As you can see, there are approximately 2,000 community water systems serving less than 500 service connections. So even if we determine to assist these systems, we will capture approximately 69% of community water systems in California. Next, please. So these are the questions for you to consider for the scope of work. Should the scope of work be broken up into discrete tasks or be end-to-end for all community water systems that meet Latin Cultural Rule Revision's initial inventory requirements? Should the scope of work be phased out so that preliminary results can be evaluated before additional work proceeds? Should field investigation be completed for small community water systems? If so, how small is small? Is it beneficial to develop video tutorials for customers to identify their own lead service line and or mobile self-reporting application? Have we overlooked any of the work necessary to complete the inventories? With that, I'm going to pause here and let Rita take over for your feedback on the scope of work for contracting service.
Thank you, Kim. All right, folks, we'd now like to open it up once again and hear from you your comments and thoughts related to scope of work, as well as any clarifying questions you may have. Please consider and respond to the questions on the screen. And as I mentioned during the last segment, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on folks in the order of raised hands, or feel free to put your comments, thoughts, or clarifying questions in the chat and I will address them verbally. Okay, so I'm seeing a few comments and questions come in, and I'll just address them in the order they come in. So the first clarifying question is, how many water systems have identified lead service lines in California?
I think I'm going to pass this question to Kurt.
Hello. So far, when Kim talked about the 2018 inventory that we did, a few were found and removed. At this time, I haven't heard anyone say that they had found an actual lead service line. We do have over 10,000 lead goosenecks that have been identified, connectors in the water systems, but until the inventories are completed, it's hard to answer, but at this time, I haven't heard of any.
Thanks for that clarification, Kurt. So I see a comment responding to one of the questions that we had put up for your consideration. And the comment is, I think customer video tutorials would be helpful for them to add to their websites. So thank you for your feedback relating to that, Melody. We appreciate that comment. Does anyone else have any comments, thoughts, or clarifying questions relating to scope of work? If so, feel free to go ahead and ask those clarifying questions, throw them in the chat, or raise your hand and we can call on you. Perfect. I'm seeing a raised hand. Richard, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Thanks. Maybe a couple just comments. Just having seen been involved in a few of these efforts as we talk to particularly small communities on what goes into the inventories. As an example, state of Washington just this weekend opened up their LSL funding application for the month of April. So talking to a few of those small communities and what needs to go into it, I could see a challenge with the technical work involved and some of the options for contracting that would involve like the educational institutions, UC, CSU, particularly with some of the students. I could see some challenges there. I wonder, and I think given the timelines associated with the October 16, 2024 deadline, it will be, I think, beneficial to look at the whole wraparound of the services to your first question here in terms of the scope, just to make sure those systems are positioned to meet that statutory deadline and move into any work that needs to be done. I think one of the outstanding issues we're still seeing is that the scopes can really vary with some of the small communities we've talked to, just the lack of some records, not knowing what they have in terms of documentation, and the potential need for some potholing can really escalate some of the costs, which could be a challenge to putting together a bids. If you did an invitation for bids, some consultants may have difficulty. Even with communities we work with, it's tough to get a handle on how much that actual scope of work is going to cost until you see what's on the ground, what they have, and some of what the history is. So I really like this. I think there is a need, and it is not beneficial for all, particularly the small water systems, to all have to go out and look for consultants to help. So trying to bring that all together at the state level with some of that set, I think is definitely beneficial. But given the timelines and the different scopes and the amount of work that could be involved when you just don't know, when there's so many unknowns, it is challenging. So I don't think there's actually probably a question in there. So maybe just comments for the good of the order.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for those comments. And I think, just looking at the metrics in terms of the balance of community water systems we have and how most of them are small, and many of us working with community water systems, I think we know that there is a challenge in terms of record keeping or knowing what's out there. And that's why this is so important. And I see Christopher is unmuted. So if you have anything to add, feel free to hop in.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for those comments. Yeah, that's very helpful. I mean, one thing which may be applicable here to this approach is we do have a lot of technical assistance, and the way that works is we get a technical assistance provider on board, but then as each water system comes in for technical assistance, then there's sort of a work order created, so we can sort of tailor what's necessary for that particular water system because they have different needs. And so it seems like that might be something that's applicable to this situation as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other feedback, questions, comments, barriers that you can anticipate given your background and work? Anything like that would really be helpful for us to hear on our side at the State Water Board. Oh, I see Tori's hand up. Yeah, Tori, go ahead and unmute.
Thanks, Britta. Hi, everyone. Tori Klug with Stantec. I had two questions, I think. One is related to what Richard just brought up. I'm wondering if you could walk through the timeline from getting contracts set up with LSL inventory contractors to actually the work being completed with respect to the October 2024 deadline, and how long it might take, I suppose, after someone's already contracted as an LSL inventory contractor to actually having them paired with water systems and doing the work on the ground. And if there's going to be, I suppose, concurrent effort to have water systems applying for support while that contractor or those contractors are being brought on board. So that's question number one. And then question number two is related to what Christopher just shared. I'm wondering if you are envisioning the majority of TA assignments going out over the next year to have LSL inventory support kind of tacked on to whatever the core challenge the water system is encountering.
So as for the first part of the question, yeah, logically we'll want to come up with the sign-up procedure in parallel with coming up with the agreement or agreements, might be a series of agreements with service providers for this. So that, yeah, by the time the agreement is executed and the contractor or contractors get staged, for these folks, yeah, they're just waiting and they're already on the list and we can get started. It's, they're not all going to be completed on day one. There's a time factor here. So some of them are going to be completed right away. Can they all be completed by October 2024? Of course they can. He says very hopefully. So sorry, all kidding aside, yeah, that's we're very mindful of that deadline. And so that would be our goal, is to get the contracts in place, get people signed up, get the inventories actually done, get all that submitted to DDW by that October deadline. That's the goal there. The second part of your question is, if I understood it correctly, is making use of existing technical assistance providers to do, this money is specifically earmarked for lead service line inventory. So there might be some commonality between the existing technical assistance providers and the providers that are providing the inventory services. I don't know about that, but there is a finite amount of technical assistance money there, and so we're trying to, keep that designated for general technical assistance. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there, so make the most of both pots of money. We really want to use this money here for the lead service line inventories, not tap into the general technical assistance for that.
Do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up?
Go for it.
Good.
I'm wondering, and this might be too challenging in terms of uniting streams of funding, but I'm wondering if a technical assistance provider is already working with a water system to conduct a feasibility study for new nitrate treatment, say, if they just had another task in their work plan that was an LSL inventory as well, if that would be potentially a way to at least make things more efficient on the water system side, and in getting someone out there to support them with their LSL inventory, understanding that there might be hard barriers to doing that in terms of uniting funding streams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say a categorical no, but I am trying to be conscious of how much money we have available to us for both objectives there. And so, yeah, that's something we can talk about with the technical assistance folks as to whether that's in the budget. So short answer to your question is yes, maybe.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for those questions, Tori. Ellen, I see your hand up. However, first, I'm going to pass it to the chat since those came in first. So I'm seeing a question in the chat saying, is there a concern for customers that may have to have their landscaped yard potholed in order to inventory the pipe material on their side? And then I'm seeing that comment or that question was thumbs up, and then someone followed up and said that it is a big concern amongst their customers who have expensive landscaping, and they're saying, could it force them to trespass?
Well, that's definitely. So the short answer, is there concern for customers? Yeah, I think customers would be very concerned. And so there is property access issues there. And so that's going to have to be part of the inventory scope of work, is addressing those concerns and working with the customers. And the customers, it's quite possible that the customer will say, no, I don't want you on my property, and I'm not going to give you access to go on somebody's property without their permission. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding of a trespass. So you have to get the owner's permission to do that. And I think Kim did mention somewhere in there, as part of the scope of work, coming up with templates for access agreements so that either the water system itself or the the inventory providers can do that and get that permission. And part of that will be working with folks of, I don't want you digging up here, or you can dig over here, but you can't dig here. I mean, that's part of they're going to be part of the process as well.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification and just, I guess, recognition of potential barriers that we could be facing as we go out and do this work. Ellen, I will pass it to you next since I saw your hand raised first before I will hop to the comment in the chat.
Yeah, so I know the lead and copper rule improvements are underway, and so I think it'll be very important to have as detailed of an inventory as possible. So I'm wondering if you all are considering or planning to include, I see that the inventory template you have posted on your website. Will you be requiring an inventory of all galvanized lines? And then also, will you be able to identify galvanized lines that have been downstream or currently are downstream of lead goosenecks and fittings? Is that part of the scope of work or?
Well, I'm gonna jump in here just before Kurt. I'm gonna say the answer to the first part of your question is yes. The second part, whether we can or not, I'll leave that to Kurt. That sounds like there might be some ambiguity to that.
Yeah, depending on where the improvements land, the LCRI improvements land, we would have to, I mean, if they land the same place they are now, the inventory does not require that, and California would have to make a special rulemaking to require that to be included. Now, we encourage it that you put the actual pipe material in the inventory, and we've had that in our frequently asked questions and in our template instructions. But the way the EPA rule is written, it's not required. So we would have to, when we make our own rule, that would have to be part of it. And we haven't made that decision at this time, and really waiting for the improvements to come out in the next few months, see where they're going.
So I'll expand on that just a little bit by saying that as a condition of providing the funding, the Water Board and DFA have the ability to put additional conditions onto the funding. Now, the potential downside of that, I say potential because I can't make any predictions. The potential is nobody's required to apply for this funding. So if they don't like the conditions that DFA or the Water Board is putting on the agreement, that is an additional hurdle that the program is going to face potentially.
But if you're using the set asides for this scope of work, like you could put those conditions within the scope of work.
Yeah, yes, no question about that.
And if it's a bill funded inventory, you can put those conditions as well.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
If a water system applies for funding for the bipartisan infrastructure law to do an inventory, you could put those conditions as part of the funding agreement. And water systems are required to complete an inventory by October 2024.
Yes, and that's what I was thinking as someone that applied individually as a water system. I don't know to what extent that water systems would object to that. I mean, since we're providing the funding and it's, going to be, for the most part, loan forgiveness or grant, and the loan is at 0%. I would hope that they wouldn't have too big an objection to that, but, just logically, anytime you put additional conditions on funding, that has to be taken into consideration.
Thank you for those questions and clarifications. I'm seeing another comment in the chat, and it's feedback / a suggestion. This person is saying that the few consultants that they have spoken to have stated that they do phases. First, looking at property records to get a baseline of how many service lines may need to be tested or potholed. And based off this, they're saying that they think that having phases like this would be helpful for water systems with few boots on the ground available. So thank you for your feedback. Are there any other clarifying questions, thoughts, recommendations, or identified barriers relating to scope of work? All right, seeing none, I would like to thank everyone for your feedback relating to scope of work. If you think of any additional feedback, we are very interested in hearing that, and we will go over how to send that in outside of this listening session in the next slide. I'll now pass it back to Kim to go over those next steps.
Thank you, Britta. Next, please. So your feedback is important. The DFA continues to collect feedback via email through April 18, 2023. You can send your feedback to the email listed on this slide, dfa-lslr@waterboards.ca.gov. After that, DFA will prepare the contracting package based on the feedback received. Also, be on the lookout for a short survey from DFA in the near future. The purpose of the survey is to gauge systems interest and readiness to apply for the lead service line replacement funding. And I have an update on this updates here regarding the 2023 lead service line grant. DFA initially planned to delay applying for the federal fiscal year 2023 lead service line replacement grant until next year. However, USEPA just released a federal fiscal year 2023 drinking water state revolving fund allotments, and the allotment for the lead service line replacement is significantly less than expected. Therefore, DFA will apply for the grant this year. DFA is still in the process of developing the lead service line replacement funding program and streamlining its application process. Eligible water systems can now submit the current drinking water SRF funding application for lead service line replacement or inventory. To date, DFA currently has 2 incomplete applications for lead service line replacement and 1 complete application for inventory. Next, please. Should you have any questions regarding the lead service line funding in general or questions about today's session, please email dfa-lslr@waterboards.ca.gov. You can also visit the lead service line replacement funding program website for updates. That's all I have. Thank you for participating in today's listening session.
And on that note, we're going to go ahead and close out the meeting. As Kim mentioned, if you have any more questions or feedback, feel free to contact us at the email that I've put on the chat and is on the screen. We want to thank everyone for your participation today, and we look forward to hearing back from you further, and make sure to stay engaged with us. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, and let me express my appreciation. Well, I know you're all busy, and so we appreciate you taking some time out of your day to give us your thoughts and questions.
Yes.
Thank you.